The stars did not scream, they whispered, and in that silence, the Varn Dominion found absolute control. From the edge of a memoryless galaxy, Earth remained a shadow, catalogued, dismissed, not for its weakness, but for its irrelevance. That changed the day the sky over Geneva split with the arrival of a message that was not transmitted. It was installed. Varn Overseer Thalek appeared as a towering simulation in every Terran capital, his expression flat with the serenity of total confidence. Earth is to be annexed. Resistance is a myth. Compliance will be rewritten. You will thank us. The ultimatum was clinical, ceremonial, one more step in a 1,000-year procession of peace by erasure. But deep beneath the ancient ice of Antarctica, sealed in polar night and myth, something stirred. Beneath layers of rock and artificial fog lay a relic from the Covenant aeons, buried before the Varn had even risen from their homeworld. The unified Terran Assembly, fractured and half-skeptical of its own myths, cast its final vote. They would not deploy armies, nor diplomats. They would awaken her, Commander Elira Voss. Her name had not been spoken aloud for 300 years. Stored in a stasis vault surrounded by glyphs whose meanings had been long forgotten, Elira opened her eyes to a world she no longer recognized. The cryo-recall was brutal. Memories of Earth's first reach, of stars touched and civilizations built, ripped through her like shrapnel of time. Standing beside her was Lieutenant Kale Dre, the only other awakened crew member in the command. Protocol chain, his eyes wide with belief he dared not voice. As ice cracked above them and the chamber lights flickered with awakening power, the ancient ship responded, not with engines, but with emotion. The Scion breathed, a structure shaped like a celestial blade, buried upside down in Earth's crust, trembled as if sensing her captain again. The ground above split in concentric rings as gravity pulsed unnaturally, and across Earth, people looked up and felt, though they could not say why, that history had just rewritten itself. The Scion rose without noise. It did not ignite. It remembered. Its dark hull shimmered with impossible geometries, adorned with covenant latticework that no modern database could decode. Within its core, memories pulsed, galaxies long dead, alliances unspoken, truths buried to protect the fragile mind of the present. Elira stood at its helm, not with command, but with recognition. The ship knew her, down to her breath, her doubt, her fragmented understanding. It did not require orders, it required presence. As they breached low orbit, every Varn temporal lattice within the solar perimeter blinked in error. Their systems registered the Scion not as a vessel, but as a discontinuity. Thalek watched from his distant command throne aboard the Varn vessel, certitude, his expression cracking for the first time in his long tenure. "Impossible," he muttered. That ship was sealed under the concord of unities. But no one on his bridge dared speak. The Dominion's memory vaults trembled, and echoes of the forbidden past bled through quantum seals like blood through gauze. Across the galaxy, entire sectors paused, not because of alarms, but because something stirred at the edge of comprehension, like a word half-remembered from a childhood dream. The Scion did not transmit threats. It did not demand surrender. It passed into deep space like a shadow against stars, its trajectory irrelevant to known trade routes or logical vectors. It was seeking, aligning, not toward war, but toward something lost. Inside, Elira walked the vessel's inner halls like a pilgrim in a cathedral of ghosts. Hologlyphs danced across the walls, whispering not in words, but in emotional impressions. Grief, fire, silence, rebirth, and beneath it all, a song, not musical, but harmonic, psychospatial. It altered thought itself, syncing Elira's memories with the vessel's ancient intelligence. She reached the central atrium, the vaulted nexus, where 5 dormant pylons stood. One glowed dimly. "One of 5, Kyle whispered beside her, eyes wet. What does that mean? Elira touched the pylon. The Scion responded, not with a weapon, but with a vision. Stars falling upward, an empire devouring its own past, a council of voices locked in desperate covenant, and a warning. You were never forgotten, only hidden. Outside, reality folded around the Scion's wake as it entered the Varn-controlled quadrant. And as Earth shrank into the distance, and Elira took her first breath as both woman and myth reborn, the Varn Dominion found itself staring into the one thing they could not rewrite. A truth awakened. The Scion moved through Varn space like a wound in the fabric of their dominion, silent, unyielding, and incomprehensible. No transmission could track it. No predictive algorithms could chart its course. Within the Varn capital citadel of Virex Prime, Overseer Thalek stood before the Council of Harmonics, his voice low and strained as he played a clipped holographic projection of the Scion's passage through the Karas Drift. Entire Varn outposts had gone dark without signs of destruction. No debris, no distress signals, only silence and memory dissonance. Some commanders reported hallucinations, some forgot their own names mid-report, and one fleet admiral had decommissioned her entire task force before vanishing. Thalek ordered an emergency deployment of reality anchors, devices meant to stabilize timelines and suppress emotional resonance, but they failed to activate when the Scion entered system range. Meanwhile, deep inside the ship, Elira Voss walked the memory corridors of the vessel, her neural link slowly amplifying. She was no longer just a captain, she was a conduit. The ship was feeding her impressions, not direct images, but sensations, so dense they anchored themselves into her core like lived experiences. She remembered things she never lived, treaties forged under triple suns, enemies turned allies under the pressure of universal collapse, children born aboard star fortresses that no longer existed. Lieutenant Cale Dre watched her transformation with a mix of awe and fear. He had been trained to follow orders, but this wasn't a military chain of command anymore. It was something ritualistic, something sacred. The Scion's awakening systems began to reveal more of its inner workings. Rooms that had no defined geometry, weapon arrays powered by mnemonic resonance, and archives locked behind cognition thresholds only Elira could cross. One such archive revealed the ship's true mission, restoration, not of power, but of memory. The ship was built to counter not conquest, but erasure. It could not just destroy Varn vessels, it could unmake their legitimacy by unearthing what had been hidden. Elira stood before a vault sealed with her bloodline's ancient sigil, the Voss seal, a looping tetrahedron burned into a wall that only responded to her presence. As she unlocked it, a pulse surged from the Scion across nearby star systems, and in its wake, dormant truths woke in others. On the Varn-conquered world of Jerevitan, entire populations began remembering songs, flags, and dialects long lost. One city woke up from a century-long psychological haze and rioted, not out, of anger but grief. The Dominion's control, long dependent on forgetfulness, began to erode in flashes of awakening. Thalek realized it wasn't a war they were fighting, it was a pandemic of memory. He issued the Dominion's highest alert, Echo Protocol Prime, declaring the Scion not a ship, but an extinction-level anomaly. Back aboard the Scion, the ship's trajectory changed without command. It began descending toward a long-dead star cluster, and when Elira asked why, the ship answered her through emotion, longing. There was something there, something buried. Not in space, but in time. The crew descended into the depths of the ship where temporal shielding began to bend. They passed into what felt like a forgotten age, where voices echoed in loops and fragments of forgotten oaths clung to the walls. In a chamber shaped like an inverted spire, Elira met the first echo of the past, a projection of her ancestor, Elien Voss, the original commander of the Covenant fleet, encoded into the ship's deepest strata. He told her that the Covenant Aeons had built 5 voices, not as weapons, but as balance keys, each tied to an aspect of galactic continuity. The Scion, his voice, was tied to memory. Others were tied to reason, will, harmony, and entropy. "You are not chosen," he said to Elira. "You are remembered." Before she could respond, a signal pulsed into the ship from an impossible direction, beyond space, between timelines. A new entity appeared. The Curator. Cloaked in shifting geometries and half-silhouetted, he addressed her not by name, but by title. Bearer of the Scion. His voice held no tone, only resonance. "You have awakened one voice. The others are sealed. The Nullum stir. The Varn were never your enemy. They were the lock. You have turned the key." Elira stared into the darkness beyond the Curator's form, where 5 stars pulsed in strange unison, and she realized the truth. This was not humanity's war. It was a call to memory, not just for Earth, but for the galaxy itself, and she had just answered. The Scion surged forward, pulled by vectors no star map could comprehend, diving deeper into the disrupted lattice of Varn territory, where the veil between memory and truth had grown thin. Systems once loyal to the Dominion were fracturing, not from force, but from the awakening. Civilizations that had forgotten their origin myths were now experiencing cascading recollections. Ancient banners resurfaced. Songs of unity long buried in neural locks burst from the minds of children, and ruins once passed over as natural formations began to pulse with covenant glyphs. The Scion's passage tore open reality folds, micro-rifts of overlapping timelines, that flickered with fragments of erased civilizations and lost wars. As Elira stood before the ship's core chamber, its mnemonic engine thrumming like 1,000 hearts dreaming in unison, she felt her mind stretch beyond the vessel's hull. She could feel not just her crew, but the gravitational sorrow of billions who had been rewritten into obedience. The ship responded, amplifying her presence, turning thought into influence. Kale reported that entire star networks were going dark, Varn systems collapsing under the weight of sudden historical clarity. In desperation, Overseer Thalek convened the deepest layer of the Dominion's Harmonic Council, invoking the forbidden directive, Chronostasis Override. Across the Dominion, vast reality arrays activated, designed to suppress anomalies by freezing time perception. But when the stasis pulse reached the Scion, it backfired. Instead of halting, the ship inverted its core and sent out a counterpulse, an echo of the first moment, a pretemporal wave that didn't stop time but reset understanding. Varn ships disintegrated, not by heat or force, but by epistemic collapse. Their crews forgot how to operate their vessels, forgot why they fought, forgot even their own names. Thalek, watching from his command sanctum, screamed as the walls of his memory crumbled inward. But even in collapse, the Dominion's deepest secrets stirred. Within the galactic border of the Scorvanis Veil, the Nullum Order emerged. Their arrival wasn't heralded by ships in motion, but by fractures in physics, points of space that inverted, forming impossible geometries from which their warforms unfolded. The Nullum did not send messages or demands. They were concepts, given form, engines of anti-time and ideological erasure. Where the Scion awakened memory, the Nullum devoured meaning. One Nullum vessel appeared above the world of Yeltri Varn, and within 3 seconds the planetary core ceased to exist in causality. The planet became a legend, a rumor, and then nothing. The Scion trembled as it felt their presence, and Elira collapsed on the bridge, overwhelmed by the weight of unbeing. But the ship responded, initiating full neural fusion. A biomechanical interface extended from the command dais and pierced the base of Elira's skull, not to control her, but to join her. The Scion whispered 1,000 voices into her blood, the collective knowledge of a forgotten empire now coursing through her nerves. She saw the 5 voices once united in orbit around a black star, each singing a different pattern into the void to prevent the rise of the Nullum. The Covenant Aeons had not defeated the Nullum. They had chained them in. Consensus reality sealed them behind forgetfulness, and disbanded the voices to keep the pattern dormant. The Varn were built atop this system, not out of evil, but out of necessity, chosen to be the jailers of truth. But their arrogance turned their duty into dogma, and their dogma into empire. Elira now understood the cost of what she had undone. She wept, not out of fear, but out of duty. There was no going back. The curator reappeared, his form flickering with urgency, and this time he was not alone. A second figure stood behind him, blurred, unreadable, but undeniably another voice. "The pattern is unstable," the curator intoned. "The scion cannot stand alone. You must awaken the harmony vector before the nullum unwrite it, the Vey." Scion recalibrated its path, and Elira gave the order to dive, past charted space, beyond Dominion borders, into the myth core known only in fragments, the veiled spiral. As the ship descended into it, surrounded by collapsing realities and flickering civilizations clawing for memory, a strange sound echoed through its halls. Music, not mechanical, but ancient, a choral chant from the First Age, sung by people whose names had never been spoken in 10,000 years. The next voice was calling, and Elira, now more than human, answered. The veiled spiral was not a place but a wound in the galaxy, a collapsed convergence of histories sealed off even from the Varn's deepest vaults, where gravitational constants, twisted like threads of thought and time, looped not in circles but in recursive symbols. The scion descended with care, its hull shimmering against pressure not of mass but of meaning, as the echoes of past civilizations clawed at its memory-laced shields. Within Elira, the ship's fusion ran deeper now, not a tether, but a merging of identities. She no longer thought at the ship, but as it, her perception unfurling across multiple chronoscapes. She guided the vessel toward the harmony vector, what remained of the second voice, hidden within the core of a dead microstar, cocooned by harmonic anomalies. The curator's presence pulsed in and out of phase, warning that nullum activity was accelerating. Already, across the outer sectors, symbols were breaking, languages unraveling, entire belief systems crumbling into dust. The nullum were rewriting galactic physics with absence, consuming not just planets, but purposes. In one sector, an armada of the Council of Sectors, newly awakened to their stolen histories, rallied to resist, only to vanish mid-transmission, their collective will devoured by a nullum rewrite pulse. Inside the star, the harmony vector flickered, less a ship than a frequency cluster, a living resonance trapped in entropy decay. Elira reached for it through the scion's mnemonic lances, aligning frequencies with her own thoughts. It resisted, not out of hostility, but fear. The harmony vector remembered the last war. It remembered the shattering of the voices. It feared awakening would not bring balance but total collapse. Elira reached deeper, pushing her humanity through the fusion layer, not as a soldier, but as a story, her own memories, her mother's voice, the weight of ancient texts in her hands, the taste of air in the Arctic stasis vault, shared freely into the core. The vector pulsed in reply, and in a burst of spectral resonance, it joined the scion. For the first time in millennia, two voices sang together. Their song spread across the veiled spiral, stabilizing timelines, sealing memory breaches, and illuminating the first complete pattern fragment of the Covenant Protocol. As the scion and harmony vector rose, unified, a burst of nullum resistance struck them, dark spines of anti-thought that coiled across the void like serpents made of silence. The scion's shields fractured, reality folding inward. Elira screamed, not in pain, but in rejection of oblivion, and triggered the Covenant pulse, a weapon not of death, but of truth shock. It surged out like a sunrise across the black, striking the incoming nullum warforms. Instead of shattering them, it revealed their origin, fragmented shards of beings who had once been the Covenant's own philosophers, corrupted by overexposure to cosmic certainty. They were not the enemy. They were the aftermath of forgotten enlightenment. The nullum were what happened when meaning was wielded without mercy. Elira, horrified and resolute, realized the only way forward was not destruction, but reassembly. She commanded the voices to trace the remnant paths of the other three: reason, will, and entropy. But before they could depart, the Nullum executed their final act, a fold strike at the heart of the Scion. The ship convulsed, fracturing its core chamber. Kyle was thrown across the command deck, bleeding and unconscious. The walls flickered, with collapsing geometry. The curator appeared one last time, his voice grave. "You cannot hold them here. You must become more." Elira stepped into the collapsing vaulted nexus and let the ship absorb her completely. She offered her entire identity, memories, emotions, choices as fuel. The Scion evolved, the hull reformed, glowing with latticework of lived truth. Elira's consciousness became its anchor, its captain, its voice. The newly forged hybrid entity, no longer ship nor human, but myth incarnate, launched into the void, not to fight, but to awaken the remaining voices. One by one, she reached them. The voice of reason, bound in a lost debate sphere orbiting, a logic singularity. The voice of will, hidden beneath the crust of a war-forged moon, protected by an ancient oath blade. The voice of entropy, paradoxically, found in the heart of a dying god's last thought. As each joined the whole, the pattern completed, and the full Covenant protocol initiated, not as a weapon, but as a systemic resurrection of meaning across the timeline. The Nullum screamed in collapse, not in pain, but in comprehension. They remembered who they were. Across the galaxy, the stars flared brighter. Forgotten cities reformed in place, civilizations reawakened to truth. The Varn Dominion dissolved peacefully, its survivors relieved, no longer jailers but witnesses to rebirth. And Elira, now beyond flesh, beyond fear, turned toward the final convergence. A vortex not in space, but in potential, from which the future itself would be chosen. Her last words, felt rather than spoken, echoed across all awakened systems. Let the galaxy remember itself. Then she vanished into the pattern to keep the song alive forever.